love that. So at least once a year we like to do a message that explains a little bit about why we integrate both Jewish and Christian traditions together. And particularly right now because we're in the middle of the Feast of Sukkot. So hopefully this will be some good information for some of you that never heard this before. And it'll actually be really even cool for those of you that have heard it. But, you know, when you watch a movie clip like that, I think about how we all love good stories. How many of you like good stories? Yeah, movies, books, musicals, songs. We love stories. It's like it's in us to appreciate and connect with those stories. And so I don't know if you ever thought about it, but there's the stories that we love the most, the ones where we get connected to the main characters and then something bad begins to happen and we start biting our nails and we get worried, and then that gives room for a hero to show up to come and save the day. And then, of course, we get the tissue box out when the hero and the heroine ride off into the sunset to live happily ever after. And then the credits come up and it says, the end. But it's not the end, right? I mean, you can imagine in your mind that it's really just a new beginning. And every story, all the good stories, the one that we really connect with the most, have this similar pattern over and over again, whether it's a song or a musical or a book or a movie. And we think of it here as we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And so he wrote a big story, the story above all these other smaller stories. And whether you believe in God or not, when writers write something, this story oozes out of them. They can't even help themselves to write these kinds of stories. And so we talk about the big story here quite a bit. In the beginning, God wrote a story. Once upon a time would be another way of starting Genesis chapter 1:1, right? As all good stories start. Once upon a time, in the beginning, God wrote this amazing story that has all of these similar attributes that we like in these smaller stories. Main characters. Something bad happens. Evil villain shows up. Hero comes to save the day. Right off into the sunset. The end. Well, not really the end, but just a new beginning where we can imagine nothing bad happens anymore. That's how God's story is. And so a couple of verses, just like I read last week in Isaiah chapter 46, 9 through 10, talks about God says, there's none like me. I make known the end from the beginning. From ancient times, what is still to come, I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. And Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says that God has set eternity in our hearts. You ever think about that? We know there's something more than just this life. God put it in us. We resonate with that. We may not know what it is. In fact, that verse says we can't even fathom what he's done from beginning to end. It's impossible for us. But God has given us a bunch of information about the story, which makes it really cool. And that's kind of what this message is about. And then, of course, Psalm 139:16 says, all the days ordained for you and for me were written in God's book. A book. He wrote a book, huh? He wrote a story that includes our story. Our story is in the big story. All the days ordained for us were written in God's book before anyone came to be. And, of course, Acts chapter 17 says that God made the world and everything in it from one man. He made every nation, and he determined the exact places and times that they would live. And so at some point, most of you came from somewhere else, and you decided, I'm going to move to Boulder or to Broomfield or to Erie. And you thought you made that decision, but as soon as you moved there, God said, knew you'd do that. So I want to talk about foreshadows. Foreshadows is a concept within the Bible where God gives us some information about the story and how it's going to play out over time. And there are lots of foreshadows, lots of things in the Bible that tell a story using a different kind of medium, but it all tells the same story. For instance, the heavens tell a story. The heavens declare the glory of God. I mean, you can actually tell some of the dating within God's story by the stars and the planets. God put that in there. The seasons tell a story. Year after year, after year, we see the seasons play out. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, has to do more with the seasons. And in our world, our new year starts January 1st. In Jewish life, we just celebrated a couple weeks ago Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. But, it's not the biblical New Year. And kind of interesting about where you might ask, well, when did Jews start celebrating this New Year in the fall? You know where they did it? In exile, when they were in Babylon. It was the Babylonian New Year, and they just adopted that as their own New Year and then made it kind of spiritual, saying, well, that was the day that God created Adam, created man, and so it became Rosh Hashanah. But that's really not the feast. God told Moses in the book of Exodus in chapter 12, verse 2, that the month of Nisan, which falls in the spring, is to be the first month of your year. And if you think about it, every year we see a story. I didn't see it so much when I lived in California. There's no seasons in California, But out here, I love it because it really connects with this story that God wrote that you can see in the seasons. You follow a long winter and you get to the new year. During winter, things are it's cold, things are dying or they're dormant. It's depressing. But then all of a sudden, there's hope, right? Boom, the new year comes. And things begin to spring to life. You see flowers begin to prop up. You see animals. It's really cool driving up South Boulder Road and seeing all the calves that are born right around March and April. And new life begins. God decided to make the first of the year the time for new life. And then, of course, the wheat and the barley and all the produce begins to grow, and eventually it becomes harvest time during the summer. And, of course, the harvest ends sometime in the fall, and then we go back to dormancy again. And this story gets told over and over and over again each year. Well, along with the seasons comes the Jewish feasts. In Leviticus chapter 23, they're called God's appointed feasts, but the Hebrew word there is moedim. It literally means appointed times. They are the Lord's appointed times. I think that word is really cool because that means that there's something mystical, mysterious about them. And they are. There's 7 of them that we see that are yearly. And they have this mix of following an agrarian cycle, an agricultural cycle. They start with the first sprigs coming out of the ground, and it ends with the final harvest. And each year, it parallels the seasons, the cycle of the seasons. But in with this mix of agriculture are these spiritual components to them as well. And one has to ask the question, why did God mingle these two things together? And that's really cool, and that'll come out a little bit more as I get into this. What are these 7 feasts? The first one is Passover. In Hebrew, it's Pesach. What does Passover celebrate? Each one of these, so together they communicate a big story, but individually they communicate a smaller story. Passover is the time when God redeemed the Jewish people out of slavery in Egypt. They'd been slaves for 400 years. God comes to Moses and says, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. He gives them the first 9 plagues, and Pharaoh does not relent. But the last one, the plague of the firstborn, where the angel of death comes and takes the firstborn of all the people who lived in the land, not just Egyptians, but God told the Jewish people, look, if you take a lamb and you slit its throat and you take its blood and you mark its doorposts with the blood, the angel of death will pass over you. And so Passover is this yearly celebration of remembering how the blood of the lamb saved the firstborn of the Jewish people during that time. That has a 1-day holiday. According to Leviticus, it falls on the 14th of the month of Nisan. On the 15th of the month of Nisan starts a 7-day festival called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Hag HaMatzot. And today, and even back in Jesus' day, we really combine those two together, but they have some significance of separating just slightly. You'll see in just a second. Feast of Unleavened Bread, remember when they left Israel, God told them to slaughter the lamb and then eat the lamb and then make bread without yeast, the bread of haste. You know, they were going to leave quickly, and so they didn't have time for the bread to rise. And, of course, yeast is symbolic of sin. And even within a Passover Seder today, the matzah you take the week before Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you take that time to go through your house, meticulously, and you get rid of anything that might have yeast in it. You pull the cushions off your couch and you vacuum it out. In fact, a couple years ago, I had a group, we were in Israel over Passover, and we were staying at a hotel. We actually had to leave our hotel and go stay in another hotel for a few hours while they went in and had the crews come and make sure, because God forbid there should be any leaven there. Leaven is synonymous with sin, and so we're cleaning it out. It's going to be a clean house. That's what Feast of Unleavened Bread is. Then the next feast is first fruits. That's the third feast. The only instructions we're given in Leviticus 23 is that you celebrate this feast the day after the Sabbath that falls during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So what day does the Sabbath fall on for us Jews? Saturday. So what day would this feast fall on? Sunday, or as in Jewish life, it's called the first day of the first day of the week. Yom Rishon is the Hebrew name for that. And so these are the only instructions. Tell the farmers to take those first sprigs as they come out of the ground. So it's just these first sprigs. It probably would have been barley. That's the early crop that's coming out. They take the first sprigs. They go over to the temple. They give it to the priest, and the priest does a wave offering. And the idea behind the wave offering is God is faithful to bring the first sprigs out of the ground. He'll be faithful to bring the rest of the crop later on. That's early first fruits. From that day on, you start counting. It's called counting the Omer. From day one for 50 days. So day 1, day 2, day 3, and you're building up to get to day 50. On day 50, you get to the Feast of Weeks. It's called Shavuot. In the New Testament, it's mentioned as Pentecost. Shavuot celebrates, basically, the beginning of the harvest. There's other things that have been attributed to it over time, but that's really what it was, the beginning of the harvest time. By now, those sprigs have grown up. 50 days later, it's ready to harvest, and so you begin harvesting. Now there's no more feast during summer. Why? It's harvest time. You don't party during harvest time. If you miss the harvest, you don't eat. And so you work your tush off during summer. But at the end of summer, you get to the fourth feast, which is Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, or the Feast of Blowing, literally blasting. And the instructions are to blow the shofar, blow the trumpet all day long. You know, you have all these crazy sounds that you make all day long. And it's basically a celebration to commemorate the end of the harvest. Now, here's the thing, so God's been really faithful. It's been a good year. Oh, did we get a bumper crop? We got apples, and we got wheat, and we got barley and peaches, and you think it's time to celebrate. But it's not in Jewish life. God prescribed the most holy of holy days, those 10 days between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, Yamin Norim, the days of awe, where we Jews begin to think about our life from the year before and ask God to forgive us, leading up to Yom Kippur, where it's thought that God decides whose name is going to go in the book of life for the next year. And so it's this really solemn time. It's kind of an odd thing that God put that in there. But after Yom Kippur, you get to the Feast of Tabernacles called Sukkot. Sukkot means booths. It's the plural for booths. Sukkah, it would be singular, booth. And the instructions are to make these man-made booths patterned after the Jews wandering in the desert, and that you take the bounty from the harvest and you decorate these booths. And you make sure that it's open to the sky. The rabbis say you should see at least 3 stars through this thing. You're looking up. Why are you looking up? Because who provided this incredible bounty for you? And it's a party. God says, live in these booths for 7 days. Eat in these booths for 7 days. Rejoice in these booths for 7 days, which is why we're having a big party tonight. We're in the middle of Sukkot, and we are going to party it up. So far, over 250 people have signed up. It keeps blowing up. My phone just keeps buzzing every minute with people signing up, so I'm not sure how many are going to come, but it's going to be wild. We're going to have food and dancing and lots of fun to celebrate this harvest festival. So how does this relate to the exile? Hosea, one of the minor prophets, began to speak about the exile even 100 years before the Babylonians come to Jerusalem. In it, he says, I will stop all her celebrations, meaning Jerusalem, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days, and all her appointed festivals. And he did. He destroyed Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple. How can you have feasts without a temple? Where can you slaughter the lamb? How can you go to Jerusalem 3 times a year as prescribed for some of these feasts? The Jews who were exiled into Babylon had to figure out how to be Jewish as exiles. It's there where modern Judaism really takes shape. I mean, they invented synagogues. Happened in Babylon. Kind of now, instead of going to Jerusalem 3 years, you have these local congregations started in Babylon. They began to observe the feast in different ways. And so this is why here at Cornerstone, we're asking the question, we're exiles, we're all aliens and strangers in this world. How do we live as believers here in Boulder or anywhere else that we live in this county? And one of the things that we do here at Cornerstone is we integrate these Jewish feasts on our calendar with Christian holidays as well. And there's a reason to our madness. It's not just because we think it's really cool, which it is. It is really cool. Because we get the best of it all, you know? Get presents, 8 days of presents on Hanukkah, and then it's Christmas. So, but here's the really cool thing. These feasts are foreshadows. They point to something. Did I skip over the foreshadow slide? Can you go back to that? Or is it coming up? No, we skipped over it. So think about this. What's a shadow? Like, you know, this light is casting a shadow right here. If you looked at the shadow, you probably wouldn't say, well, there's Gene. That's just my shadow, right? In order to find me, you got to kind of follow the shadow. And if you follow it far enough, you'll go, oh, there's Gene. And that's what these feasts do. They're amazing. And let me just go through them really quickly. The first one, of course, is Passover. And that connects to Jesus' death. It is not a coincidence that Jesus died on Passover, on the 14th of Nisan. And you're going to see that every one of these, all 7 of these, fall exactly on the day that these feasts are observed. And Jesus was crucified on the day that the lambs were sacrificed. There's a specific day. There's not just a specific day, there's a specific time when the lambs were sacrificed. They were sacrificed between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of Passover. What does Matthew tell us? It was the 9th hour. Oh, the 9th hour. Let's say we start counting at 6. Uh-oh. The 9th hour takes us to 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock is the 9th hour. We count them by hours. Jesus was crucified and he died at the exact same time that the lambs were sacrificed. And that's why we read in John chapter 1, when John sees him, he says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of mankind. The same way that the blood of the lamb protected the firstborn in Israel, the blood of Yeshua, the blood of the Passover lamb, protects us. We are covered by it. We read in 1 Corinthians 5:7, for Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. So in my mind, God's one for one right here, right? You with me? Okay, the next day begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. What were they all panicking about when Jesus died? Oh, it's the Sabbath. You know, we got to get him down. We got to get him buried. because it's the first day of unleavened bread. It's the Sabbath. They got to get him into the tomb. And Jesus was buried during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 3 days, he remains in the ground. And it says if you connect the yeast, the sin, it says in 1 Corinthians 5:21, God made Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us. He became leaven for us, that in him, faith in him, we might become the righteousness of God. And so, in my mind, we're 2 for 2 here, right? 1 Corinthians 5:7 says, get rid of the old yeast, that you may be new batch without yeast, as you really are. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. 2 for 2, are you with me on that? All right. Then we get to that third feast, the one of first fruits, where we're told just to celebrate it after the day after the Sabbath. So Jesus dies, he's buried, he's there. You can reconcile these days. He's there for 3 days, and we come on to first fruits. Now just think about this. Back up 2,000 years ago. So it's the day after the Sabbath. What day would that be? Sunday. And the farmers have brought the sprigs to the temple, and the priest is waving it, and he's saying, if God is faithful to bring these first sprigs out of the ground, he'll be faithful to bring the rest of the crop later on. And all of a sudden you hear some crazy Meshuggah Jew running down the street saying, he's risen! He's risen! You think that got some people's attention back then? And then Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, but Messiah has indeed been raised from the dead. Look at the word he uses, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as in Adam all die, so in Messiah all will be made alive, but each in his own turn. Messiah, the first fruits, then God will be faithful to bring the rest of the harvest later on. Then, when he comes, those who belong to him. In my mind, we're 3 for 3. Not the day before, not the day after, and in some case, in the exact hour. Then we begin counting for 50 days. We get up to the Feast of Weeks, to Shavuot, called Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. Remember, it celebrates the beginning of the grain harvest, the physical harvest. What happened 2,000 years ago on Shavuot? It says when the day of Pentecost came. Notice it says the day. It didn't say a few days from there or not a few days after there. It's on that day. They were all together in one place. The disciples are waiting, right? And then suddenly there's this blowing wind and these tongues of fire on the roofs, and they begin speaking in all these languages of the pilgrims who are in town, because this is one of the 3 feasts that Jewish pilgrims had to go to Jerusalem for. And so they see this going on, and they yell up to them, look, you guys are all drunk. And Peter says, no, it's 9 a.m. We're not drunk. But this is what was mentioned by the prophet Joel, that in the last days, God will pour out his Spirit on all people. And then he gives this kind of rather uneventful evangelical message. And at the end of that message, these Jewish pilgrims who are listening to him say, what must we do to be saved? And Peter tells them, and it says that 3,000 Jews were baptized and believed that day. And so in the same way that the feast celebrates the beginning of the grain harvest, on that day began the beginning of the soul harvest. 4 for 4. 4 for 4. Now it's harvest time, right? Jesus said, pray to the Lord of the harvest. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Spiritually speaking, it's harvest time. It's summer for us. You don't party. Well, we're still going to party tonight, but you get what I'm saying. But when does the harvest end? Well, it ends the same way that the grain harvest ends, with the blowing of trumpets. What does it say? It says that 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 and 17, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. The shofars will be blowing, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 51, the famous nursery. Any of you work in the nursery here at Cornerstone? Anybody? All right, this is your memory verse right here. So listen, I'll tell you a mystery. This is the nursery verse. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. You get it? In a flash, too. Sooner the better. Whew. In the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. And so there it is again. The trumpet is going to sound. Coincidence? I don't think so. Revelation 14, verse 15 says, take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Now you think, oh my gosh, the Lord has come back. And it's harvest time. I mean, harvest is over. Let's celebrate. Let's party. But it's not. Because what happens next is what's called in Scripture as the Great White Throne Judgment. It's the mother of all Yom Kippurs. And it says in Revelation 20, and I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. Books were opened. Another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. It's not party time yet. But once we get past that point, it is. Same thing that happens in tabernacles. You know, you build these man-made booths and you live them for 7 days. But what's going to happen after this great white throne judgment? Jesus told us. He says, in my Father's house, there are many tabernacles. There's many booths. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, then I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. And of course, Revelation 21 says specifically, when John gets this vision, he sees a new heaven and a new earth, New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, adorned as a bride. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's tabernacle is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. An eternal party. The end. Well, it's not really the end, is it? In faith, we imagine a new beginning where there's no more tears, and there's no more mourning, and there's no more abuse. There's no more poverty. There's no more death. And so, the seasons, and particularly the feast within the seasons, tell a story. God is a storyteller. He tells this story many ways. This is just one of the ways that he tells his story. And if we get to this graphic here, you see that the first 4 feasts have been fulfilled. Will God fulfill these on those feast days sometime in the future? I don't know. My guess is he's 4 for 4. He's going to be 7 for 7. But we'll see. How long will it be? I don't know. But it may not be that long. Who knows? Lots of opinion about that as well. But I hope that what you see is how cool this is. And worship team, you can come up. And to me, this is one of the most amazing foreshadows within Scripture. It's like, who could think of this and make it happen? Well, there's only one person I know that could do that. You just couldn't make this all, you can't make history happen like this. But you could write a story before the beginning of time. And you could say, I'm going to make it play out the way I wrote it. Just like God said in Isaiah chapter 46. And I hope that that really, really encourages you in your faith. And maybe if you heard this for the first time, it'll fill in some of the blanks about why we here at Cornerstone have what we call this dual expression model. Jewish believers remaining Jewish, non-Jewish believers remaining non-Jewish, integrating both Jewish and Christian traditions together, not because it's cool, but because it's amazing. And the more you integrate them together, the more you understand the depth and the complexity of the God that we believe in. It's amazing. One last verse before we go. Jeremiah, we've been bringing up Jeremiah quite a bit. He was one of the most fervent exilic writers, often lamenting, sad, depressed over the sad situation that Israel had found itself in. And here's one in Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 20. He says, "The harvest is past, the summer has ended, and we are not saved." And of course, he means this literally, that whatever year that he is writing this, they're still in Babylon. The cycle has gone around, and they're still there. And I don't know, it went 70 cycles. It went 70 years. But just like so much of what these prophetic writers wrote about, he was also looking into the future to us. For us to say, the harvest is past, the summer has ended, and we're not saved. You see, God wrote a story about redemption. That's the whole theme of the story. He wants to save the day. He wants to save you. In whatever condition you're in, whatever you're experiencing in your life, he wants to lift you out of that. And he wants to put you on solid ground. How does he do that? Through faith. You exercise your faith in believing that he is the Passover lamb, that his blood shed for you covers you so that the angel of death will pass over you when that time of judgment approaches. It's so simple that most people pass over that. You just believe. And so if you've never done that, it's really just a moment in your thought life of transforming from disbelief to belief. To saying, I thought this was all hocus pocus and just a bunch of crazy stuff, to, wow, this stuff really makes sense. And nobody could put this all together unless there was a God. And so I hope that's what you experience today for those of you who are on this faith journey, just trying to figure out what it all means. So, Father, I pray that you would continue to show us, God, so many ways, these complexities, the foreshadows that you have wrote into the story, mysteries, that somehow we can't see them until you open our eyes to them. We celebrate the fact that we are in the harvest season now, and someday this will be an eternal party. But tonight, we're going to party and raise the roof and look forward to this time for your return. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.